Resumption of debate on the revised 2021 to 2022 budget.
Honourable members, pursuant to the resolution of Parliament passed on Thursday, 24th March 2022, we will now proceed with the resumption of the debate on the revised 2021 to 2022 budget. Honourable members, take note that each member may speak only once to the revised appropriation bill as well as the consequential bills. I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Ratu Naiqama Lalabalavu, to give his response to the revised 2021 to 2022 budget. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I also rise to offer a response on this side of the House to the proposed revised budget, sir, which was presented last night by the Learned Attorney General and the Minister for Economy. From the outset, sir, it would be remiss of me if I do not acknowledge the Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Ministers of Cabinet, Honourable Assistant Ministers, and Honourable members of the government backbench. I also acknowledge the presence of the Honourable members of the Opposition. Sir, on the same token, I would also like to take this opportunity on behalf of the members of the loyal opposition in welcoming our Honourable Prime Minister back into the country, particularly in this august house, after a very successful medical procedure in Melbourne, Australia. We would like to wish him the very best and will continue to pray for his health. And we acknowledge and thank his family and the people of Fiji for their moral support and prayers during those very difficult times. On the same token, sir, we are also saddened to hear the shocking news of the untimely loss of your youngest brother, the late Ratu Urasawa, and of course your cousin, Ratu Naiqama. We also like to to share our deepest condolences to you personally, sir, your family, and the Wonowoturongo Komuna in the unexpected loss of two members of the Wonowoturan. The two chiefs are very close relatives of mine as well, and our prayers are with you and your family and the Wonowo during this difficult time. So let me get back to the budget address. And we all agree that we've just gone through a crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we feel that we are not out of the woods yet. Sir, there is an environment of uncertainty, fear, mistrust, and the lack of confidence among our different communities, sir. There are many reasons for the cause of uncertainty in our nation. One of the major reasons is the lack of confidence in the government of the day, due to manipulation and the lack of transparency, particularly in matters of national interest in the last 8 years or so. When we were advised that there will be a revised budget, the first question that came to mind is that, do we really need to have a revised budget? taking into account that we're only 3.5 months away from the end of the current financial year. Sir, we expected a revised budget in late December or early January, and this is in line with the Honourable Minister for Economy's commitment when announcing the 2021-2022 national budget, when he clearly stated that a revised budget will be announced if the need arises. So, in considering the revised budget, a number of factors have come to mind. As at of the 20th of February 2020, we have received more than $1.8 billion of assistance from abroad. This is unprecedented. These include $838 million Fijian in grant, direct budget support and loans and in kind of about $10.86 million Fijian. This excludes the $200 million loan from Japan and the sale of 44% of the EFL share. In addition, sir, the last 5 years government, on average, usually underspend around $500 million. Government should consider funding urgent expenditure through relocation from existing resources. I'm fully aware that you cannot transfer funds direct from one head of expenditure to another, but there are already adequate funds in Head 50 to be utilized for urgent expenditure requests from government agencies if it cannot be sourced from within the ministry's budget, which are normally underspent. Each time the government should show some humanity, compassion, and be more transparent to the people of Fiji so that we can all be united and move forward together as united nation, living in this extraordinary time rather than creating further uncertainty. Sir, in 2014, the government fiscal strategy, we could say, is very well articulated and very sound. But in reality, sir, they practice the opposite. According to the fiscal framework of 2014, the government will gradually consolidate government finance over the medium term and will continue to increase its operating savings by strengthening collection of operating revenue and prudently managing operational expenditure. Most importantly, a large share of government expenditure will be directed to investment. In 2016-2017 budget strategy stated that the government will stimulate the economy to generate growth to provide the fiscal space needed to consolidate government finance. Again, in 2018-2019 financial year, the strategy stated that the government will reduce the net deficit gradually to 3% and reduce it further to 2.5% in the 2019-2020. I will be deliberating further in details on the failure and inconsistency of the Fiji First fiscal framework when highlighting the status of the nation, sir. Basically, the truth of the matter is that nothing has been achieved thus far, but the nation's socio-economic indicators continue to decline and currently are in a very poor state. The claim that we'll be like Singapore and be better than Australia and New Zealand, I think is rather a sick joke. We should not be comparing ourselves with Singapore and New Zealand, most importantly Australia, sir. The focus of our development agenda must be based on the premise of availability of our natural resources, our own human resources capacity, and at the same time be mindful of our vulnerability as a small island developing state. Most importantly, we must ensure that the people are generally happy rather than be rich, unhappy, and with sustainable debt. Sir, when we turn to the future outlook, there is no doubt we will all appreciate and agree that the whole world is now living in extraordinary times, and Fiji is not excluded, as highlighted by the Honourable Minister of Economy. Although we have gone through 3 waves of COVID-19 with different intensities, we still have to live with the pandemic and must continue to make the necessary adjustments to live with the new norm. Again, we are now facing an uncertain future because of the crisis in Europe, and which could further escalate, particularly in the increase in the price of petroleum products and major strain in the supply chain of goods and services. These 2 events has brought a very clear message that we must make hard decisions to ensure that we brace and cushion their impact of these unprecedented events in the short, medium, and in the long term, sir. It's time that we must take a united front as a nation. We must put aside our personal egos, small differences, and collectively work together in our resolve for the interests of our people rather than self-centered interests or the interests of the selected few, which has become the norm under the Bainiwatama government. Sir, I say this with all honesty and sincerity because I believe that we are all patriotic, sir. So I urge government not to politicize issues and consider our comments constructively and recommendations positively and make adjustments where necessary rather than continue to be defensive as usual. So it has been the norm of the Honourable Minister of Economy to call members of this side of the House unpatriotic. When we constructively criticize and suggest alternatives to be considered, his latest buzzword, when people disagree or suggest alternatives, they are accused of being un-Fijian. May I suggest to the Honourable Minister of Economy that he must be more sensitive in the choice of words in the public domain, particularly in our multiracial and multicultural society. I believe that we are all patriotic in our own ways. For me, sir, personally, as a traditional leader and then as an indigenous Fijian, I continue to be patriotic based on values and traditional norms, which I will continue to embrace for the common good, so as other people in other different communities. It would be interesting for the Honourable Minister of Economy to explain the meaning of the term un-Fijian, because everybody embrace values that are close to their heart based on their belief, faith, and culture. Generally, sir, the word un-Fijian creates an environment of uncertainty, mistrust, and disunity amongst our different communities, particularly at a time when we must all be working together as a nation of one people, with one common goal for progressive and prosperous society. On the budget announcement, sir, generally, sir, the people of Fiji and those that are abroad will always take an keen interest and look forward to any budget announcement based on their own individual group or group interest. Particularly, they will be asking the fundamental question on what is there for them in the budget. As I say this, I would like to refer the government of the day to the amount of revenue that is being generated by people who live abroad and send money back to Fiji. Sir. The basic question they are asking, what is in the, is there something for them there in the budget? Because remittance has surpassed other major sectors of our economy. And we do not need to emphasize that in this august house. It's clear as daylight. But again, when you have 600 million coming annually from overseas, what has the government done to at least address the plight of our poor people when they do return home, or when they make visits home? I've already echoed it in this august house. It will be similar to the Philippines. They are provided certain percentages of allowable kgs in freight when they come back home. And this is to support them in the great work that they've been doing for their motherland in sending money back home. And the question that we would like to ask is what has the government of the day done towards the plight of our people that have been living abroad and sending money back home? So the private sector and business community will always anticipate that there will be incentives available to support their businesses to grow and give them confidence for additional investment. Workers will be looking forward for relief to cushion an impact on the substantial increase in the cost of living that we are currently experiencing and the possibility of increase in minimum living wages. On that note, we on this side of the house are quite happy that at least we've heard from the horse's mouth that they finally agreed on $4 minimum wage per hour. I only wish if you could revisit what we stated in this august house in 2018, where the mention of $4 an hour as basic wage was proposed from this side of the house. But my honourable colleagues will be dwelling on that, to elaborate further on that. Members of the general public will be hoping for improved services, particularly in health, education and better infrastructure facilities, while those in the maritime zones will be looking for better improved shipping services so that they can replenish their supplies in a timely manner and the availability of regular, reliable and effective social services. So the national budget is an integral part in the planning and development of our economy. It is unfortunate that the Fiji First government has not taken this as a serious exercise. So with this budget presentation, we now have a record-breaking trend by the government in that in the last 24 months, we have had 4 such budgetary presentations and adjustments. 4, sir. It is obvious from this that the government does not have the ability to properly plan anything. It has grossly failed in its efforts to effectively lay out its 12 months revenue and expenditure proposal, and this ad hoc conduct of government seriously worries us, and we know this is an election budget. That's the bottom line of the budget that was presented last night. Sorry, Mesa, it's an election budget. At the time of 2021, 2022, at the time of the 2021-2022 national budget presentation, many of us could predict that there would be another budget within 12 months. And here we are, sir. The people and all those who care about the country's economic future note that this is another bad planning of government, sir. The government needs to think hard. We all know that the national budget making process goes in tandem with the long-term economic planning of the country. From our experience in 2020-2021, during the time of the pandemic, it was clear that Fiji, like other small developing countries, needed new approach to policies to alter the structure of the economy. We stated this very clearly in our presentation at the last budget session. The government should have considered long-term structural adjustment policy. Alternatively, the planned 2021 to 22 budget, now that this adjustment could have aimed to materialize and reflect a plan for future economic development and growth. Clearly, sir, it is not. This is not all about election in 2022, sir. I repeat that again. We know that the Fiji first government is desperate to make a huge impression on the people of Fiji, sir. People have seen the government's gross failure in everything, from bad policies to manage the COVID-19 crisis related to mobility restrictions, healthcare facilities and support services to economic policy blunders. So far, government's policies have not shown much result to spin the economic recovery, sir. And if a case's budgetary process involves incorporating valuable suggestions from the line ministers, public officials, parliamentarians, and most importantly, the citizens through public forums. The budget systematically transformed those demands and proposals into allocations embedded with policies for implementation for the progress of society. Moreover, a sound budgeting practice stimulates trust among citizens, and that the government is taking into consideration concerns raised by them and is dedicated to implementing the plans that are designed to achieve the greater needs of society. The goals and objectives must be prescribed by policies and be within reach of the country's realizable stock of resources. It then becomes the obligation of the state to implement them with absolute proficiency and render it sustainable within a time frame, but definitely for at least in 12 months. Many studies have shown that well-structured long-term policies are very effective in creating growth. Policies must clearly send out positive signals. Our policies do not bounce out any of those as a signal to us, sir. As a key stakeholder in the economy, the government should exercise clarity, that is the objectivity, transparency, credibility, and reliability to provide direction to all other stakeholders. These have been distinctly missing in the last 4 budget presentations since the March of 2020. National budget is not a mere document, but rather a contract between the citizens and the states. Depicting the plan for nurturing and allocating public resources for rendering services to the people. Government has grossly failed in this regard. Waste and misuse of public resources has been the hallmark of Fiji First government since long, and as a result, we have only seen the sufferings of our people in the last 24 months. Hundreds of deaths during the height of the second wave of the pandemic occurred due to negligence and massive gaps in our health system. If our health system was any better, we could have avoided many of the deaths that happened. Without international tourists and lackluster industries, the Fiji economy is doomed. On that note, I'm quite happy to note that the Honourable Minister of Economy has announced certain improvements in the way our health workers are being treated, sir. They've slowly made a piecemeal arrangement in getting together the old policies of payment overtime for our nurses, and they have the various descriptions of how the overtime is going to be paid, because this is seen to the slow mass movement of nurses to better opportunities abroad. That has created the gap, even though we have 2 outlets of training through the College of Nursing and that of the one run by the Saga, yet we are still short of our nurses. So some of the fundamental questions that I've been raising in anticipation for the announcement of this revised budget includes, will the revised budget stimulate or reinvigorate the economy in crisis? Will it address the low level of investment? Will it generate employment opportunities? Will it reduce poverty and hardship? Will it cushion and address our unsustainable debt? Will it consider sustainable revenue options? Will it improve productivity in the economy? Will it address the increase in price of goods and services? And will it address the increase in price of fuel? Some measures were announced last night, and we are grateful for that, sir. At the sectorial level, whether the revised budget will provide additional resources to support and improve our health services, infrastructure and supply of basic medicine, and manpower after mass resignation, particularly from our nurses, I've just highlighted, sir. Improve our education system for preschool, primary, secondary, and tertiary level. Will it ensure food security and export-led growth? Will it improve production in resource-based agriculture, fisheries, forestry, manufacturing, etc., which are performing well below potential, sir? Improve our basic infrastructure. Will it support our rural people? Sir, the current state of the economy, if I may turn into that now, sir, our economy is in a precarious position with very few options available. The risk and uncertainties to the economy are quite enormous, sir. While the risks, such as climatic calamities and pandemic-related uncertainty continue, new global shocks continue to pose risks. While these are largely beyond our control, the government needs to be imaginative in providing new options, sir. The government's vulnerabilities have been magnified due to its own faults and lack of understanding of the issues. As the IMF puts it, Fiji remains at a very high risk. The recovery and medium-term outlook in the baseline scenario also hinge on the full recovery of tourism, but it's unclear whether the pre-pandemic tourism and spending patterns will re-establish favorable conditions. Here, I'd like to pause for a moment and go back on some of the data that were provided in this August House by the Honorable Minister responsible for tourism, that they've been getting very good bookings before the opening of our borders. Correct me if I'm wrong, Honorable Minister, I think I heard from you 80% booking. But only last night I heard reality, which was just around 50%. As we were informed that maybe most were continuous booking, that they have been withdrawn and they've reapplied and rebooked, but they've been taken as something that we could be relying upon. Yet, when the borders open, we're grateful that some at least have come our way, but not that was suggested in this August House. This is the reason, sir, why government needs to re-examine the contingent liabilities that exist as well, sir. These entities need appropriate implementation policies to remain viable and economically competitive, sir. So there are already nasty observations about the FDB in the social media. There are allegations of biases and favoritism in disbursement of government-backed loans. Broadly speaking, as the IMF puts it, the sustainability of the economic outlook will rest critically on the government's ability to embark on policy reforms necessary for macro-physical stabilization and to begin reducing public debt, while at the same time creating economic growth by business confidence and productive investments. I now turn to the status of the nation's debt source. Sir, The issue regarding our national debt has been in the public domain for some time, and there has been a lot of discussion on the unsustainability of our national debt level. Before deliberating on our high unacceptable level of exposure due to our current stock of unsustainable debt, I would like to revisit statements and claims made by the Honourable Minister of Economy regarding our national debt. First, he continued to preach that we must borrow smartly. Second, in a statement published in the Fiji Sun of 11th May 2022, claiming that the previous government left intergenerational debt. Previously, government used to borrow money to pay for operating expenditure. However, Fiji government has focused its borrowing on capital projects. During his face-to-face consultation on the proposed revised 2021-2022 national budget in Nandi, said and unprofessional as usual for the Honourable Minister of Economy to continuously blame previous governments when things don't go right. The Fiji First government has been in power for more than 15 years and continue with the blame game like little kids rather than taking the responsibility head on. The people of this country know the truth and they cannot be misled or deceived anymore. And the fact of the matter, if I may quote his usual lines, the Honourable Minister of Economy, is that our total accumulated debt since independence up to 2005 for a 35-year period only was around 2.42 billion. Today, just within a span of 15 years, our debt level has ballooned 4 times to almost $9.6 billion. This is in addition to a contingency liability for the same period, which has increased from 1.2 billion to 1.7 billion. This means that our national total exposure today is hovering around $11 billion. More than our current level of GDP in real price. The claim that previous government used to borrow money to pay for operating expenditure, I think is a lie. It's quite mischievous and deceiving, and amount to misleading to the public at large. Most importantly, it undermines the integrity of previous leaders who were being patriotic and prudent in managing our public finance. I remember, as part of the previous governments on many occasions, we always reminded that we must borrow within our means and live within our means and only borrow for capital formation. The claim that the current government only borrow for capital expenditure is an outright lie. The state of affairs in our nation truly reflects the opposite. So one just have to look at the investment trends in the country since 2010. The highest level of investment on record by this government was in 2013. During the upgrading of the number 1 Ratu roads at a cost of $228 million, funded through a Chinese government loan which was completed in 2015. Due to this project, our investment was at 27% of our GDP. Since then, the investment in the country continued on a declining trend. In 2019, prior to COVID, our investment level was only hovering around 17% of GDP, far below the 25% level required to ensure that there is always going to be a sustainable growth if we hit the 25%. This is despite the substantial increase of our loan portfolio and government claim that it continued to capital expenditure allocations. It is worth reiterating that, Mr. Speaker, previous governments always have a well-planned investment program under its public sector investment program, or known as PSIP, targeting infrastructure progress with both high economic and financial return, which is not less than 25% and 50% respectively, which are prioritized and properly sequenced to ensure to ensure continuity and to generate investment in other sectors, so to generate employment opportunities. The main reasons that loan funds were directed for infrastructure development because Fiji was classified as a developing country and not as an underdeveloped country, and we could only have access to ordinary capital resources from multilateral institutions. Most importantly, sir, to ensure our employment rate remains low, today our unemployment rate is hovering around 4.8% compared to the average rate of unemployment of 4.2% previously under previous government regimes. It is unfortunate that the nation's status has been downgraded, which is quite embarrassing, not because of the impact of climate change, but because our GDP has declined in real terms, in which I stated earlier that we are back in the 2014 level. It underscores the fact that while other similar small island developed countries continue to progress, Fiji continues to lag behind now, sir. In addition, our international credit rating has been downgraded to show high risk associated with our current high debts. Despite the reminder from reputable experts and multilateral agencies, this government continues with its unsustainable spending spree. Poor management of government finance and the lack of accountability and transparency has led to the increase of our debt stock, which is unprecedented. We cannot blame COVID-19. Our debt level was already on the high side before 2020. Another reason for the sad state of our debt in the marginalization and removal of institutions that provide independent advice to the government and ensure that there is always a check and balance that are in place to ensure that the processes and procedures are followed as required under law, sir. The removal and marginalization of key institutions has undermined transparency and accountability, which is hallmark of the dictatorial approach of the Fiji First government. Sir, there is no such thing as borrowing smartly. At the end of the day, debt has to be paid, whether it's concessional loan or interest-free loan. Therefore, sir, it is fair to say that this government will leave a legacy of intergenerational debt and not the previous governments as claimed by the Honourable Minister of Economy. We can confidently say, sir, that our accumulated debt is getting worse, bad to worse, sir. The existing debt to GDP ratio is extremely high and currently hovering around 90%, sir. Sir, with the prevailing conditions, any added government expenditure would squeeze the remaining fiscal space to near zero. This puts Fiji in the league of highly indebted poor countries, or better known as HIPCs. So we expect the debt to GDP ratio to reach as high as 95% by the end of 2021 to 2022 fiscal year if the current national budget expenditure were excluded fully and contingent liabilities are taken into consideration. It is unfortunate, sir, that the government's planned medium-term strategy to reduce the debt ratio to 80% by 2025 to 2026 and 60% by 2035 to 2036 may be reasonable, but requires many fiscal abstinence during the first phase of this process. Sir, the IMF in its December 2021 consultation statement has stated about the severity of the debt situation in Fiji, or the debt situation Fiji is facing right now. It states that the Fiji public debt situation worsened significantly in the wake of COVID-19, with a record economic contraction and sizable fiscal deficits. Sir, it further stated that the public debt increased to 70.8% of GDP by end of 2020, and it increased further by 22 percentage points in 2021. As per the IMF report, the debt reached 86% of GDP by the end of 2021. So it's worth noting that the IMF conditioned the reduction of Fiji's public debt over the medium term only if there were 1, a steady recovery economic growth, 2, implementation of a phased fiscal consolidation plan, and 3, no new major shocks occurred. In the post-December 2021 eventualities, say all the 3 conditions laid down by the IMF for the fiscal consolidation to occur seem nullified. First, the economic recovery does not seem to be steady due to diminishing global demand due to war in Europe and the US-China trade tensions there. Secondly, the government's approach to fiscal consolidation does not seem to exist. Thirdly, the economy has already felt shocks which could be long-lasting. This is the recent floods in Fiji, our Pacific neighborhood, and rising fuel prices globally. These are ominous signs of continued effect of the climate change and global conflict. Therefore, the solution to our economic problems boils down to local actions. Effectively, Fiji will need local resources to address the economy, which the government barely has at its disposal, pertaining to steep physical space there. The impending consequences of additional government outlays in the future would raise the debt levels even further. With the debt level reaching 90% of GDP, relying on domestic resources is not possible. It is certain that the government's hoodwinking tactics will not work. Not anymore, sir. Real problems need genuine solutions, sir. Blaming the past government will surely not work. We need creative solutions proposed and delivered by those who know the issues, and solutions that are effective, innovative, and efficient. Now let me look at the review of our GDP, sir. GDP growth. Sir, finally the chicken has come home to roost, sir. Despite the claims of unprecedented growth in the last 15 years, under the Naiqama government, the government cannot hide any more from the truth. Sir, our real GDP growth is the same level as we had in 2014. Therefore, very little or no progress has been made in the last 8 years. I would like to reiterate this point that I made earlier, that we will never be the same as Singapore or better than Australia and New Zealand, as usually championed by the Honourable Minister for Economy. The fact of the matter is that our real average growth for 10 years between 2011 and 2019 is only around 3.24%, much lower than the growth period between 1971 and 1980, which was around 4.8%. If we look at the real growth average between 2011 and 2020, it is only 0.75%. The low level of growth in the last 15 years is clearly reflected in our key macro and sectoral indicators, which clearly shows a declining trend. While my esteemed colleagues on this side of the House will be deliberating on the details of the performance in their respective share of portfolios, I will just provide a broad overview, sir. It is unfortunate that our investment as a percent of GDP continued to decline despite the fact that the government continues taking an expansionary approach. There is nothing to show for the unsustainable debt level, which I've highlighted earlier, sir. Our investment at the end of 2019, it was just 17% of GDP, far below the necessary level to ensure sustainable economic growth. Unless we change strategy of directing our resources to meaningful investment, our economy will continue to be driven by consumption. Consumption support by handout and freebies, since we are in the election year. And we will continue on a declining trend. We thank you, Honourable Ministers, for your generosity in going around the country with boats and vehicles. We thank you. We thank you. It's for the good of the country. but at the same time, you're preparing for the elections as well. Today, sir, we clearly notice, if I may repeat what I just stated earlier on, especially the provision of tractors, agricultural tools, fiberglass boats by the Minister for Labour. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thanking you, Honourable Minister. Our current employment rate is hovering around 8.4%, which is unprecedented in the history of this country. Look at that.
Order.
The government should review figures readily available rather than manipulating the facts to suit their own narrow agenda, sir. Sir, associated with the low level of investment and high unemployment rate we are to experience to date is the increase in the incidence of poverty, sir. Again, this is quite alarming. When the urban population has increased, including that of the peri-urban, and the rural population has decreased. Yet, poverty is on the increase again, sir. Today, we can confidently say that at least more than 40% of our population are living below the poverty line. An additional 20% are facing hardship. These figures are based on the Household Income and Expenditure Survey report, which was carried out by the BOS before the COVID-19 pandemic struck our shores. At the end of 2019, 30% of our total population were living below the poverty line, and the majority of them reside in our rural areas and the maritime zone. It is unfortunate that the messenger was sacked because the government did not like the message. Rather than sacking the messenger, government should look at a sustainable way in reducing poverty rather than the band-aid solution of giving out non-targeted assistance to those that don't really need them. On a positive note, it is interesting to note the high level in our foreign reserve, which sits at around 3.2 billion, which is equivalent to more than 8 months of import of goods and services. Our liquidity level is hovering around 2.9 billion, and remittance continue to increase and is now a major source of foreign exchange. It's also interesting to see that our foreign reserve has increased during a period when our nation is in crisis and the production is low. That again is very interesting. The foreign reserve has increased, yet our production is low. Again, sir, as a layman, I always believe that foreign reserves are mostly earned through income from exports of goods and services. But in our case, foreign reserve is generated through grants, especially budget support and loans. The question is, what happens when we start repaying these loans and they are not used for investment to generate income? With regard to direct budget support, this is the first time, Mr. Speaker, sir, in our history, the history of this beloved country of ours, that we have received such assistance. It is not the ability of this government to negotiate such support as claimed. Budget support are given on humanitarian ground, Honourable Minister, and decided by the donor to help the hardship that the people of Fiji are facing due to the pandemic. The government, as usual, should stop boasting and misleading the people. Sir, sooner or later, the direct budget support will run out, and we have to consider other sources. Therefore, the government should ensure that funds are used in the most productive manner rather than the handout of freebies in anticipation of the buying of votes. Interesting to note that the high liquidity level in the domestic market, which is hovering around 2.9 billion, high liquidity may be good in the short term, but it continues to increase substantially after 2017, prior to the pandemic. To me, sir, this means that the people are not borrowing, and financial institutions are reluctant to lend because of the high risk associated with lending, and the borrower reluctant to borrow because of the lack of confidence. This is a clear indication in the lack of general confidence in the economy, particularly foreign investors, due to the poor governance, poor policies, poor laws, and other situations and human rights abuse that are critical to ensure confidence. The risk is just too high for all parties. So I said earlier, remittance continue to increase. Remittance continues to increase, particularly personal transfers, which has surpassed revenue generated by tourism. On many occasions, Mr. Speaker, I highlighted the importance of remittance for economy in this august House. I've also stated this, just alluded to just a while ago, sir, and suggest for government to consider ways in incentivizing our people living abroad to send more personal remittance. The government should at least support them in reducing the cost of transferring funds to Fiji. At the same time, look at ways to ensure that remittance received are invested in productive sectors with high returns. I believe with the support from government, our people from abroad will send more money into the country. We are grateful for what we heard last night, this rugby investment opportunities that has been created. On the sectoral performance, the poor performance of our national resources based on sector, including tourism, just confirmed the low growth rate experienced in the last 5 years. So the contribution of our agriculture sector continued to decline, despite the fact that it is very important for our food security and export. We all understand the hard work that the government and the Honourable Minister of Agriculture is undertaking, going around supplying seeds, everything. But what's the likely turnaround time? Another 10 years? 15 years? Because the agricultural sector used to be right at the forefront during since independence. In 2016, the agriculture, including the sugar sector, contributed to almost 20% of our GDP. In 2020, it only contributed to 3%, and in 2021, down to 1.1%. In 2020, government should seriously consider allocating more resources to the agriculture sector in providing employment opportunities, increase production for domestic consumption and export, rather than encouraging the import of food products, which will continue to drain off foreign reserve. So we just need to take a look at the government of Israel. You spend quite a lot of time in the government of Israel, together with the honorable ministers on the other side that serve in the military. They only became independent in 1948. Yet they are self-sufficient in food. And there's a surplus, and now they export it. The total land area is only 22,000 square kilometers. Ours, when we put all the 300 islands together, it comes to about 18,000 square kilometers. The difference is not that much. Yet they do intensive grazing. They are self-sufficient in dairy products. During the first Gulf War, they supplied dairy products to the Allied forces that were based in Arabia. This is just to show how a country like Israel can turn things around and be self-sufficient in a very short time. And more importantly, they then have a very healthy population because of the surplus of food and the availability of food. And that reduces the recurring costs of maintaining hospitals. We only have about 2 major hospitals, one in Haifa and another one in Jerusalem. The rest are just health clinics. Wasn't that part of our plan soon after independence? The health centers, but these health centers are very much neglected now. Maybe we'll see the interlinks between the agricultural sector and other sectors of the economy coming together or contributing to each other, and that affects the healthy growth of the people. We should consider alternative and diversification within the sugar industry. The SDL government came up with the idea of the alternative livelihood. It's good to hear what has been proposed by the Honourable Minister of Economy last night in trying to help the sugar industry or the low production farmers, relying heavily on their leaseholds to provide them shelter. But I hope they should vigorously work on that to ensure that there is a better feedback from the returns from the agriculture sector or the overall economic sector at large. Sir, we're now looking at mechanization through cooperative arrangements to assist smallholder farmers. Our forestry sector, despite the increase in the harvest of mahogany and pine plantation in contribution to our economy, the contribution to our economy continues to decline. In 2014, the forestry sector contributed to around 36.7% to our GDP, and in 2020, its contribution was only around 3.2%. Rather than exporting wood chips and sawn timber, we should consider more value addition to support employment, foreign exchanges, and improve the income of resource owners. I turn to fisheries and agriculture sector, which is also important for our food security, and its contribution to GDP. I'm sorry, Honourable Minister, it's still marginally low. The industrial fishing sector continue on a declining trend, and we need to look to innovative ways to entice foreign industry players to return to our shores. There must be incentives, the right mix of policies to support the industry by making Fiji a viable port for them to offload their catch and at a competitive cost for the provision of auxiliary services such as bunker, ship repairs, replenishment of supplies of quality, and most importantly, it should be at a reasonable cost. Third, there is very little improvement on our manufacturing sector. Its contribution to GDP has declined from 16.5% in 2014 to 2.3% in 2018 and only 0.3% in 2021. Again, this is a clear indication in the lack of confidence from our manufacturers to extend their productive capacity due to the lack of confidence in the government of the day. That said, reality is only a few selected companies have been given preference and priority. There must be a consistency of policy so that we have the confidence to compete in a level playing field. Another major contributor, sir, to our foreign exchange is through transshipment. In 2014, we earned 1.1 billion, and 2019, we only earned 990.4 million. The decline in re-export is a challenge because our services are getting quite expensive, sir. Therefore, other island nations are considering other options and alternatives which are cheap and reliable. It is unfortunate that we have not improved our port facilities in order to be more cost effective and become more competitive. Sir, taking into account the background information I've earlier elaborated on, I will now turn to the revised budget proper. As usual, the revised budget continued to be bullish and sugar-coated to at least, you all know it's full of promises and will not be fulfilled, and programs that will not be implemented. The marketing gimmick by the Honourable Minister for Economy to attract voters as we move towards the election will not work because the people of Fiji knows the truth. Since they have been misleading the nation in the last 15 years, basically, it is anticipated that the revenue is to increase from 2.085 billion to 2.253 billion, an increase of over 200 million, while expenditure is expected to increase by over 100 million from 3.691 billion to 3.715 billion. As I've stated earlier, sir, these figures are unrealistic because of the following. On average, the annual revenue shortfall is around 500 million in the last 5 years. Secondly, average annual under expenditure is always around 600 million. So therefore, how realistic are these revenue and expenditure figures taking into account the shortfall in revenue and under expenditures? On the revenue side, it's interesting to note that the VAT for at least 21 basic food items will be zero rated, and there will be an increase of VAT of 15% to 21 items. The bottom line here is the poor will not only benefit from the zero rated VAT items, but also the rich. They also eat flour, they also eat everything that you are now promoting, that something that would attract to the poor people, but you're excluding the rich because they also eat that. It also means that the poor will have difficulties in accessing items such as textiles and footwear. The basic principle of VAT is that it is broad-based and everyone shares the burden with a small increase. Everyone pays equal tax. To help the poor and the most vulnerable, a more targeted approach is more feasible to increase existing assistance due to the increase in VAT rather than directing and removing VAT on basic food items, which will also benefit the rich only. That's my solution, Honourable Pramila. It will. On the increase in the minimum wage to $4 per hour, although it will be in 4 tranches, its impact on our suffering and the narrow-based manufacturing sector will be unsustainable for small manufacturing businesses. Sir, it is common knowledge that our manufacturing sector performance is on the decline since 2014. The manufacturing sector contributed 16.5% of our GDP, and in 2018 it was only 2.3%. And in 2021 it further reduced to 0.3%. It is unfortunate that very little attention is given to this sector. Whilst we recognize that it is important that we should expand our health services through private general practitioners, it is also important that the existing public health facilities status of the health service in the country indicated that very little has been done to improve the existing facilities since 2016. We on this side of the House welcome the increase in the allocation of our public utilities, but the question is whether these institutions will have access to these additional funds. When required, they do not have the capacity to fully implement projects and have been earmarked for implementation. The following entities in the last 5 years, on average, have underspent or did not utilize funds allocated to them. Water Authority, 110 million. Fiji Roads Authority, 227 million. Ministry of Agriculture, $32.9 million. Ministry of Fisheries, $9.53 million. Commerce and Trade, $19.83 million. Sugar, $17.55 million. Local government, $13.18 million. And miscellaneous services, $239.97 million. Sir, basically what I'm saying is that most of the ministries underutilize the fund allocated to them. In total, government average under expenditure is around $500 million annually, sir. And to conclude, sir, what is very clear in our mind that the revised budget presented by the Honourable Minister for Economy last night is sugar-coated to deceive the people of Fiji, and which in simple is just an election gimmick to buy votes. Keep false promises and hoodwink the people of this nation. I say with confidence, sir, because the inconsistency in messages delivered by the Honourable Minister for Economy and the reality differs on the ground, sir. The budget figures, at least in the last 5 years, shows a lot of inconsistency in commitment outlined to fiscal framework and paper. In fiscal framework in paper is totally inconsistent or opposite from the action taken on the ground. Our debt level will increase and is unsustainable, sir. Our revenue measures sound good on paper, but the reality, there is always a shortfall year in and year out. This budget adjustment is a desperate measure to remain in power by the Fiji First government. Sir, this is not an adjustment. This is entirely a new budget altogether. It's not a supplementary budget. This raises many questions about the authenticity and sincerity in our budget-making conventions. It seems like this budget is full of national budget for the next 12 months. And again, it comes with a statement of review. This does not seem like an adjustment. Indeed, this is not genuine. This is another hoodwinking exercise. In fact, it's a crude joke on our country. There are fundamental reasons why the government is not opening up for debate on this appropriation bill. Sir, putting down Standing Orders 101 is a mockery of Parliament. The opposition condemns this in the most strongest terms possible. Not given time to the opposition to respond appropriately to an appropriation bill is contrary to democratic norms. Sir, while the measures taken in this adjustment to reduce food and fuel prices is welcome, the question is, why now? This reduction in VAT on basic food items should have been done in 2021, when the budget was considered in July of 2021. However, the VAT increase from 9% to 15% on non-essential goods and services is a regressive policy move, Mr. Speaker, sir. While on one hand, food and fuel prices are reduced, all other prices, including investment commodity, will increase. It is obvious that the government is financing this budget using grants from our donors and developing partners. This is the reason why government is suppressing the necessary debate on the bill. Sir, is this the reason for the Honourable Minister of Economy not to show clearly the revenue streams in the budget? If the budget is indeed an adjustment, all actual revenues in the last period need clear disclosures. Why are those disclosures not made? The measures taken in the adjustment has no indication for a long-term policy adjustment towards economic growth and development. On the contrary, increasing VAT from 9% to 15% on non-essential goods and services will only increase the production costs. The Honourable Minister of Economy intends to fix healthcare services overnight by tweaking a few policies. The people have suffered terrible health, especially the terrible health services for quite some time, while the rich, including the fellow government ministers, have the luxury of overseas treatment. Some of the measures such as pharmaceutical policy, may be helpful, but the shortage of doctors and nurses in the country will not realize in the short run, sir. Many of the minister's assertions that about better health services due to change in policies are just pipe dreams and utterly wishful, sir. We cannot produce doctors and nurses in a short period. It takes years to train them. Only last year, the minister declared policies to withdraw MBBS scholarships, and now it brings back 20 scholarships provided with grants, government grants. 20 was provided. Only last year, the minister effected policy to increase the qualifying marks of TELS to 280, and now it reduces it to 250. This is the very same thing that happened during when SVT came in. When we introduced the Fijian Affairs Scholarship in the multi-ethnic affairs to ensure, because most of our indigenous Fijians and rural Indians of Indian descent are late starters. That is something that we have to accept. It's part of us in this small world, sir. When you're a late starter, why can't you be accessible to scholarships with low entry marks? Compare that to other Pacific region countries that are part of the University of Fiji. They're in the University of Fiji with low entry marks. And us, we have to be moving it right up to 280. For sure, we're just creaming off. And the poor will suffer here more. Well, otherwise you go through the TELS arrangement, all that is that everything, when you're qualified or you graduate, you are confronted with a high debt level. And that is a cause of problems in affluent countries like the United States right now, sir. High level of people committing suicide because they cannot pay the high debt level that they have to encounter, sir. The budget seems attractive and populist in a number of ways, such as price reduction by duty, VAT reduction, but some economic growth you expect from the tourism, but infrastructure. And sir, before I take my seat, I hope that it will be not in the too distant future, we won't be seeing another mini budget being proposed in this House, just to help us guide through the government in its preparation for the elections. Yeah? In view of this inconsistency and lack of transparency and accountability in the management of our public finance, we're not in a position to support the revised budget, sir. And I thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for his contribution to the debate.